Okay. Normally, I wouldn't react to a legal eagle video, but like today, of all days, like this is important. Because I think he's about to talk some sense about like the legal challenges to replacing Joe Ballot on the Biden box. God, maybe I need to retire.
Joe Biden drops out. Now, many people felt that the stakes of the 2024 election were high and that Joe Biden was not the best candidate to defeat Donald Trump. So with the election a little over 3 months away, some Democrats urged Biden to drop out while others thought it would be political suicide. But
And I have to be 100% clear here. Okay? Under normal circumstances, it would be political suicide to drop out of a race right now. Okay? Under normal circumstances, this is insanity. This is not the logical or responsible course of action. Okay? But we are not in a normal situation. We are not in normal times, and this makes it suddenly a viable and reasonable thing to do when we look at the pieces that were dealt, when we look at the cards we got.
now that Biden has dropped out, it raises a ton of thorny legal questions. Is it legal for delegates to vote for somebody else? Can Republicans challenge?
I can answer this one. Absolutely legal for delegates to vote for someone else. The delegates are not bound legally to vote for any one candidate, which is why the Biden administration was calling delegates to try and assure their loyalty going into the convention.
Challenge it in court? Can Democrats meet the...
Can Republicans challenge it in court? Yes. Can Republicans successfully challenge it in court? Absolutely not.
state ballot deadlines? And what happens?
Can Democrats meet the state ballot deadlines? Yes. That is why they're doing the early nomination process, specifically to meet the deadlines for Ohio. Though, there's some legal nebulousness if that got delayed and they just waited until the DNC, but they're not going to do that.
To all those campaign funds. Now, earlier this year...
Now, the campaign funds should just transfer to Harris, though I'm guessing this video is being made not under the assumption that Kamala Harris is just going to sweep the DNC and is probably going to weigh the different options of how this all goes going forward. So that will be interesting. I am interested to hear what his legal opinion on this is going to be.
Joe Biden and Donald Trump won their respective primaries, making them the party's presumptive nominees.
Oh, yeah. I mean, ideally, we should have avoided all of this nonsense, and Joe just shouldn't have run in the first place. But we don't get that. We don't get that, unfortunately.
But they only become official nominees at the party conventions. Just 40 years ago, the system was...
So it's not possible to do with campaign funds, Sophie, between different people, but I think that there is an exception for your vice president on the campaign. You know, because that's like the role of a vice president, right? The role of the vice president is to take over, to step in, if the president can no longer perform their duties. So there's an exception for campaign funds to be transferred to a campaign for the vice president, who then campaigns to be the president. You can't, however, transfer between like Joe Biden and like Gavin Newsom, for example. But if like, again, for the sake of argument, let's say Gavin Newsom were to step into the race and become the new nominee at the DNC, what would happen to Joe Biden's campaign funds would be that they would go to the DNC, and then the DNC would have access to those funds and could transfer them to like a super PAC. And then that super PAC would have all that money, but wouldn't be able to coordinate with the campaign or provide for campaign expenses, etc. So it would be still used in some way, but the main thing is that they would have to recreate an entire funding apparatus for Kamala Harris. Or not for Kamala Harris, but for whoever became the new nominee that wasn't Kamala Harris. Does that make sense? Yeah, Azalea Sprouts, exactly. We're not currently in the worst timeline right now. As unbelievable as that might seem.
Different. Republicans and Democrats held primaries or caucuses, but the results were advisory and the nominees were determined behind closed.
Okay, the VP can step into the campaign if the president says, I do not wish to be president next time, actually. Like, specifically, when you register your campaign, you also register your VP, regardless of if you're the candidate. Or you are the president. Yeah, exactly, Foxbat. That is also my understanding.
Closed doors or at party conventions. Now the situation is reversed. The primaries determine who wins the presidential nomination, and the conventions are largely commercials for the winning candidates. The Republican convention took place in mid-July, and the Democratic National Convention is coming up, as of the time of this video, in August. But it's not unprecedented for a president to face a challenger at the convention.
Yeah, and Cyrex, I understand your worries and fears. So far, no other faction has emerged among the Democrats, except maybe a long shot Joe Manchin bid, but he's going to be summarily crushed if he tries to re-register as a Democrat and pull that shit.
In 1980, Jimmy Carter was deeply unpopular with the American people, so Senator Ted Kennedy tried to get Carter's delegates to vote for him. The effort failed, and Carter got curb-stomped by Ronald Reagan in the general election. And the last time the Democrats held a convention in Chicago in 1968, it was a disaster.
Also, just real quick, good job, Minnesota, my home state. Didn't vote for Reagan. Not our fault.
Disaster. Lyndon B. Johnson was pressured to exit the race because of dissatisfaction over the Vietnam War, and as Vice President Hubert Humphrey didn't compete in the primaries, but he inherited the delegates that had been pledged.
Wait, really? We're up to 122 House endorsements for Kamala Harris? Yeah, okay. Like, I don't think another faction is going to emerge here. Like, the leader of the House has come out in favor. Does anyone know, has Chuck Schumer come out endorsing Kamala Harris? I have to imagine that has happened already. I love this channel and a fellow Minnesotan. Hey! I don't know how to read your name because my inclination is to read it either 100 for life or hardened for life or HRD&D for life, and I don't know how. Hardened for life. Cool. Got it. And what is this? The point about progress is you have to have a vision and a belief in what can be, unburdened by what has been. We did it, Joe. No Schumer endorsement as of yet? Okay. If we can get the leader of the House and Senate Dems to endorse Kamala Harris, like, it's effectively done, you know?
To Johnson. Bobby Kennedy had been assassinated months earlier on June 5th, 1968, but at the time of the convention in August, he had still amassed 393 delegates. Humphrey had 561, and Eugene McCarthy...
Yeah, we got AOC in the House endorsing Kamala Harris. Yeah. I mean, that was basically a given, but it's good to know. The progressives are also, like, supporting Harris. We got this.
McCarthy had 258. The resulting convention was a mess, with states trying to seat competing slates of delegates, protesters clashing with police, and intense debates about the Vietnam War. Eventually, Humphrey was nominated and lost to Richard Nixon in the general election, and you can check out my video about the trial of the Chicago 7, a movie about the 8 activists arrested during the '68 convention. So let's say that Biden decides to release his delegates at the convention, freeing them up to vote for somebody else. Do these delegates have the legal right to switch their votes to another candidate? Well, generally, yes, but there's little precedent for that, and state laws still come into play. The initial question is whether state elections supersedes a political party's rules. The Supreme Court decided this issue in a case called the Democratic Party of U.S. versus Wisconsin ex rel. La Follette. The Democratic Party Selection Rule 2A for the 1980 National Convention required delegates to be chosen by voters who were affiliated with the party. But Wisconsin law allowed non-Democrats to vote in an open primary and required that delegates selected under the system vote at the state party convention in accordance with the primary results. The Wisconsin Democratic Party selected its delegates in a caucus after the primary, but the National Democratic Party prohibited those delegates from participating in the 1980 convention because independents and Republicans voted in the primary and influenced the outcome. The Wisconsin Supreme Court upheld the state law, but
We're about to go in on these psychopaths. Yeah, I think the Republicans are about to get rocked. I think they're about to get rocked, dog.
Supreme Court reversed that decision, finding that the political parties enjoy protection from undue state intrusions into their associational rights. The state argued that it had a compelling interest in state elections, including, quote, preserving the overall integrity of the electoral process, providing secrecy of the ballot, increasing voter participation in primaries, and preventing harassment of voters. But the Supreme Court ruled that all of those interests go to the conduct of the presidential preference primary, not to the imposition of voting requirements upon those who, in a separate process, are eventually selected as delegates. Therefore, the interests advanced by the state do not justify its substantial intrusion into the associational freedom of members of the national party. Now, states still have the right to regulate the way that political parties select their candidates. If you're interested in the limits of state power over elections, you can see my video.
Really? Okay, so this is actually really good info. My understanding was that, like, basically states abided by what the parties decided. Like, the parties put the candidates on the ballot after they received the official nomination. I guess that was my assumption. And that there would be, like, of course, built-in contingency in those laws in case, like, the primary presidential candidate had to bow out for some reason or, like, got, assassinated or something like that. In most states, you're right. I'm curious to know what the exceptions are.
About the Supreme Court's ruling that states could not ban Trump from primary ballots because he violated state law by participating in an insurrection. So the La Follette decision would seem to mean that a political party's rules mostly supersedes state law. But many states still have provisions impacting national party conventions. For example, Florida state law stipulates that, quote, any party rule directing the vote of delegates at a national nominating convention.
I'm sorry, guys. Brian Schatz. Okay, nah, the entire party is falling in line, guys. He's one of the main whips in the Senate for the Democrats. Madam Vice President, we are ready to help. Yo, the coconuts got him, guys. The coconuts got him. Also, like, goddamn, he really did climb that tree. Look at that. He's got good form. Actually, I need to retweet that. What am I doing? What am I doing? All right. We all just little coconuts now.
Shall reasonably reflect the results of the presidential preference primary if one is held. Now, Biden won the Florida primary, and Florida law is silent on what happens when a candidate withdraws or releases their delegates. Presumably, that means that Florida delegates would follow the rules of the National Democratic Party, but it could be a mess. We can game it out. If Harris was nominated instead of Biden, that would arguably reasonably reflect the results since she was on the ballot as vice president. But if someone wanted to contest the meaning of shall reasonably reflect the results of the primary, there's always the possibility of litigation. And don't forget about Dean Phillips, who came in second in the Democratic primary. The Phillips campaign went nowhere despite making Biden's age his main talking point, but he might argue that he should be next in line for the nomination. But of course, the problem for him is that there'd be no party rule that mandates that result. But what are the Democratic Party rules?
If Dean Phillips did that, man, like, what a scumfuck move.
For the 2024 convention. Well, delegates are divided into two categories, pledged and unpledged. Pledged delegates have to vote for whichever candidate in their party wins the primary or caucus in their respective state, while unpledged delegates may choose to vote for any candidate. In the Democratic Party, unpledged delegates are known as superdelegates, current elected officials and party leaders who can support any candidate. Now, the overwhelming majority of Democratic delegates were elected back in their districts, and they tend to be local activists and volunteers. Quote, in 2024, there are an estimated 4,672 delegates, 3,933 pledged delegates, and 739 superdelegates. Now, back in 2018, the DNC voted to ban superdelegates from voting on the first ballot at a contested national convention. The nominee needs 1,976 delegates to confirm the nomination. Biden...
And I gotta say, I don't know that we're gonna have a contested convention. Genuinely. Like, the entire progressive wing is endorsing Kamala. The entire, like, conservative wing seems to be falling in line as well. Like, maybe Joe Manchin would, like, stir things up, but, like, I don't think he's got the juice. I don't think he can do it. Yeah, I don't think he can or will, but, like, that... Yeah.
Biden won about 3,900 delegates during the primary, and if Biden releases his delegates because he's withdrawing from the race, then DNC bylaws
Ms.
generally
Milena.
give the DNC the responsibility of filling vacancies in the
I
nomination
was already
for the
kind
office
of
of
dressed
president
up.
and vice president under Article 2, Section 8F of the bylaws. Voting to fill a vacancy on the national ticket shall be in accord with the procedural rules adopted by the Rules and Bylaws Committee and approved by the Democratic National Committee. But what if Biden hadn't dropped out of the race? Could pledged delegates have gone rogue and voted for somebody else? The 2024 delegate selection rules state that, quote, no delegate at any level of the delegate selection process shall be mandated by law or party rule to vote contrary to that person's presidential choice as expressed at the time the delegate is elected. However, Rule 13J of the delegate selection rules seems to give pledged delegates the ability to vote for somebody else. Quote, delegates elected to the National Convention pledged to a presidential candidate shall in all good conscience reflect the sentiments of those who elected them. Now, we don't know what constitutes in all good conscience. It's never been tested before, since these rules have only been in place since 1984. But a delegate could argue that the sentiments of voters...
1984! 1984! It's all falling into place, man. Isn't law fun, guys? I mean, it's not really fun, no. I just, it is. Simply is. Ms. Milena, thank you for gifting Charlotte Nova a sub.
Retiring the white guy.
He's not retired yet. He's got at least like a year-ish, a little less than a year.
In their state have changed and that they no longer want Biden as the nominee. But pledged delegates are probably locked in and can't vote for somebody else.
I hate that I went to law school. Oh, God.
But there's also no law that would prohibit the DNC from changing the rules before or during the convention. But you can bet that the Republican Party could and probably would file legal challenges of any effort to replace Biden at the convention, though they probably wouldn't have the best arguments. If Biden withdraws and or releases his delegates and the party nominates somebody else, Republicans might not have standing to challenge that process. Of course, that doesn't mean they wouldn't try. Now, obviously, if you're suing to stay on a presidential ballot, you'll want some good election lawyers. But if you want a great lawyer, my law firm, the Eagle Team, can help. If you've suffered a data breach...
Also, this is a great meme. I enjoy this. Thank you. The haters said I couldn't do it, and they were correct. Honestly, great call from the haters. Oh, God. Also, since we're doing this little ad break, folks, please go follow Legal Eagle, all right? Like, if you're not following Legal Eagle and, like, subscribed and liking their videos, like, what even are you doing with your life? Nothing good. So get in there. Follow Legal Eagle. Give him some subscriptions, because, frankly, he's based and hot and law-pilled. And if you ever need a lawyer, they're a good team of lawyers. Actually, Jack, this is 4D chess from word go and was always planned to go this way to ensure the first female president. See, Lady Raincloud, you say that as a joke, but I have something to show you. And it's a new ad attacking Kamala Harris, and you'll never guess where this goes.
Kamala was in on it. She covered up Joe's obvious mental decline.
Our president is in good shape, in good health, tireless, vibrant, and I have no doubt about the strength of the work that we have done.
But Kamala knew Joe couldn't do the job, so she did it. Look what she got done. A border invasion, runaway inflation, the American dream dead. They created this mess. Kamala owns this failed record.
It was
Making America Great
Kamala
Again Inc. is
all
responsible for the content
along.
of this advertising.
Kamala Harris was the shadow president from the beginning. The deep state was upon us, and we didn't even know. I love the cut off parts when Biden got up just fine, right? Everything Joe Biden did, it was secretly Kamala Harris. She's very sneaky. Like a ninja. Is this a real ad? It's a real ad. Incredible stuff.
Especially if you got a data
God.
breach letter saying that your social security number was leaked and you're like, why do you even still have my social security number?
Sorry.
Or if you were involved in a car crash or dealing with mesothelioma, we can represent you or help find you the right attorney who can. It's so important to talk to a lawyer right away so you can maximize your recovery. By the names of those candidates is absolutely the worst. Ohio has a state law that says, quote, a political party certifying candidates so nominated shall certify the names of those candidates to the Secretary of State on or before the 90th day before the day of the general election. The 90-day requirement means that the deadline for ballot certification is August 7th, which is 2 weeks before the DNC convenes in Chicago. This provision has caused problems before. In both 2012 and 2020, both Democratic and Republican conventions were held after the 90-day headline, and the legislature extended the deadline on both occasions. But this time it's different. Republicans were angry that some states tried to kick Trump off the ballot, for insurrection. So Ohio Secretary of State Frank LaRose, who was in the midst of a primary for U.S. Senate, refused to accept provisional certification. The Republican-dominated Ohio legislature talked tough about not extending the deadline, but LaRose eventually lost his primary to car salesman and Uber Trumper Bernie Moreno, and the legislature continued to take its time. And instead of filing a lawsuit, the DNC decided it will hold a virtual roll call nominating Biden-Harris in time for the 90-day deadline before the official convention.
And the forces in the party, like Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, Obama even, convinced the DNC to delay the online digital certification roll call event because it was supposed to start today. Voting was supposed to start today, as we're recording this, July 21st. But it got delayed until August 1st at the latest, and we'll see whether, Kamala Harris being anointed as kind of like the presumptive nominee accelerates that, and they move it back to Wednesday of this week, the 24th or the 27th. We'll see.
Now, this seems to be technically unnecessary because Ohio enacted a law extending the deadline, but Democratic officials smell a rat. DNC Rules and Bylaws Committee co-chair Minion Moore, who is the chair of the convention, said that they couldn't trust the Ohio legislature, which has proven to be, quote, untrustworthy stewards of voting rights. Moore believes that the state might pull a fast one and undo their law to screw Biden over at the last minute.
I can absolutely see, a Republican state doing this. So I think that this is a valid concern to have.
Quote, she noted that the law delaying the deadline doesn't go into effect until August 31st. But the DNC confirmed that the virtual roll call would happen, but not before August 1st. When this decision was made, there was no significant movement to
I live
Biden
here, they
to
will do
drop
this.
out.
Yeah.
So in addition to all the backroom discussions of Biden's mental fitness, the Democrats are juggling the Ohio situation and the virtual roll call, which is not great. It would have been a mess if Biden had dropped out after the deadline. But what would have happened if Biden had been formally nominated at the convention, but withdrew, died, or became incapacitated sometime thereafter? Well, this has sort of happened once before in modern times. In 1972,
Thomas Eagleton? Thomas Legal Eagleton? A relative, perhaps.
Vice presidential nominee Thomas Eagleton withdrew from the ticket after reports that he'd been hospitalized due to his mental health. This is why Pawnee is better than Eagleton.
When I say that people from Eagleton are snobby and evil, and they look down on Pawnee, and they would most likely exterminate everyone who isn't from Eagleton if they weren't so busy being obsessed with themselves.
But the Democratic National Committee met and appointed a new candidate for vice president, Sargent Shriver. The same process would be in play if Biden withdraws after the convention. The DNC has 453 members, and they all are empowered to fill vacancies, as I discussed earlier. Now, the rules don't require the DNC to pick the vice presidential nominee, but it's highly likely that...
Does AOC look like a fool for dying on the hill of keeping Biden? Absolutely not. Are you kidding me? Like AOC and Biden and Bernie's like influence over Biden grew so much that like his campaign speeches recently have been reflecting their rhetoric and policy ideas. Like that's crazy. They became part of his inner circle, and now Kamala Harris is inheriting those policies that Joe Biden has been championing that come from Bernie and AOC. And on top of that, by staying loyal to Biden, at least superficially, public facing wise, they earned themselves political capital, political favors that will allow them to be in Harris's inner circle. This is basically like their bet is paying off, guys. They made a gamble where either they win extraordinarily big with Biden, or they win to a slightly lesser degree with Kamala. And frankly, those are the only two viable candidates here. So either the Democratic nominee for this election cycle wins and is beholden to some extent to the progressive wing of the party, or Trump wins and we're all fucked anyway. So like it was a gamble, but they risked pissing off their progressive voter base in the short term for long-term like influential gains.
They would pick Kamala Harris to replace Biden. But the Heritage Foundation, fresh off of its launch of Project 2025, announced it would challenge efforts to replace Biden in 3 swing states: Wisconsin, Georgia, and Nevada.
Yeah, this is what I'm like most worried about with this legal challenge. The rest of it, I'm not super worried about. This part is finally where I'm like, I guess they could bring those legal challenges, but I don't know that they would be very effective. Like, I feel like the cases would get thrown out of court. Did you talk about VP prospects today? I did, and to sum up very quickly, Charlotte Nova, the 2 main ones that I hear getting bandied around a lot are Andy Beshear from Kentucky and Roy Cooper from North Carolina. And I'm hoping that Roy Cooper is the nominee because number one, he looks like this, okay? And I think a guy who looks like this is a very good thing to add to a Kamala Harris ticket. And number 2, he's the governor of North Carolina and he can't run for another term and is otherwise kind of at the end of his political career, which means he would be willing to jump onto this campaign. And he's a Southern Dem who can shore up, Virginia, North Carolina, etc., and appeal to the Southern states. I think this is like the perfect candidate. I don't know if they're going to go with him for the VP pick, but I think this guy is perfect for the job. And Cyrix, I don't think Kamala is going to endorse or get AOC as VP because, frankly, AOC doesn't want to be vice president. AOC wants to be in the Senate.
The main legal hurdle for the Heritage Foundation and other Republican-aligned groups is that they need to demonstrate standing. So you can bet the Democratic Party would argue that it alone has the power to nominate its presidential candidate and that no outsider has standing to challenge that. But there would be another obstacle to replacing Biden after the convention: the state ballot deadlines. The Democratic National Convention isn't until late August, which would make for some tight deadlines if they were to replace Biden after the convention. And while the Heritage Foundation is already spreading misinformation about ballot deadlines, alleging that in some states like Wisconsin the deadlines have already passed, that's not true. A memo from the Wisconsin Elections Commission confirmed that the deadline for certification would be Tuesday, September 3rd, 2024. So if Biden dropped out after the convention, the National Party will still have time to name a different candidate for the Wisconsin ballot. But the Heritage Foundation also asserts that Wisconsin can't replace Biden unless he dies. State law says, quote,
What?
if a vacancy occurs after nomination due to the death of a candidate of a recognized political party for partisan office, the vacancy may be filled by the chairperson of the committee of the proper political party under the section. Now, these provisions allow the party to replace Biden if he dies, but you can bet that there would be litigation over whether the fact that it specifies if the candidate dies means only if the candidate dies. Now, states like Nevada have similar laws, but all of this is state dependent, and there are 50 different states, and I'm not going to go through every single state's laws. The bottom line is that the Republicans will fight a new candidate in every state they can. It will be litigation Thunderdome. And the other big question on everyone's mind is, what happens to the money? If Biden is not the Democratic nominee for president, what happens?
Okay. So that didn't really allay my fears when it comes to the legal challenges, but I also don't think it's a really compelling case. Like, I don't think that this would meaningfully block Harris from being the nominee.
To all of his campaign funds. As of June, Democratic groups, including the Biden campaign, the DNC, state Democratic parties, and other groups, had about $240 million of cash on hand. And money that Biden-Harris raised for the DNC would still be able to be transferred to the new nominee. But things get more complicated for the funds held by the Biden-Harris campaign committee. As of May 30th, the campaign itself had about $91 million. This money was officially raised by the Biden-Harris ticket, and it legally belongs to the campaign. So if Harris became the nominee for president, she would probably inherit that $91 million. She is, of course, still on the ticket.
Good.
In the event...
Also, that's significantly less than the $250 million I was making it out to be. So thank you for correcting me on the amount of money, Legal Eagle. I appreciate it.
Harris is not the nominee, well, then that money obviously could be refunded to donors. But also the Biden-Harris campaign could transfer that $91 million to a federal super PAC, which could then spend its advertising on the new ticket. But it wouldn't be able to be used directly by the candidate itself. Though the lines between candidates and super PACs are certainly blurring these days. Now, a super PAC is a type of political committee that is permitted to raise and spend soft money, but only so long as the super PAC does not contribute to federal candidates directly, who are subject to FICA limits. This prohibition on super PAC contributions to candidates extends to coordinated communications, which are a type of coordinated...
Basically, if it went through a super PAC, it would still be useful, but it wouldn't be able to do the things a campaign needs the money to do, you know? Like, that is an actual problem. So, kind of, we need it to be Harris for a lot of logistical reasons, including the logistics of money.
Expenditure that qualifies as an in-kind contribution under FICA. Candidates may not knowingly accept excessive or otherwise prohibited contributions from super PACs. So if the money is transferred to a super PAC, then the campaign won't be able to coordinate how the federal super PAC spends that money. But a super PAC called Future Forward is testing the limits of its influence. The New York Times reported that Future Forward is withholding $90 million if Biden stayed in the race. Now, obviously, the Biden campaign couldn't coordinate with Future Forward, but if they withheld funds, then it means that that money wouldn't have gone to the benefit of the Biden campaign in general. But it's likely Joe Biden would have the ultimate authority to decide where the money goes. Now, some candidates have found ways to circumvent the FEC. When Michael Bloomberg briefly ran for president in 2020, his campaign was mostly self-funded. When he dropped out, he transferred $18 million from his campaign to the DNC. That $18 million is well over individual contribution amounts, but the FEC allowed it because it came from a campaign, albeit one funded almost entirely from the candidate's own money. And a new candidate for president would need to raise a whole bunch of money very fast. But the bottom line is that things would be relatively straightforward if Kamala Harris was the nominee, and things would be awfully messy if it's anyone else.
Oh, really? Well, got some news for you, Legal Eagle.
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree?
I think she's gonna be the nominee, guys. I think she's gonna be the nominee. Something tells me...
You ready for a very radical statement?
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree?
I believe the Act Blue fundraising over the course of the last 6 or 7 hours.
Everything is in context. by what has been. What can be unburdened 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 by what has been. I can imagine what can be and be unburdened by what has been. All in which you live, what came before you. You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? Coconut tree? You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? Everything is in context. Fell out of a coconut tree? Coconut tree? You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? Coconut tree? Fell out of a coconut tree? Everything is in context. All in which you live came before you. You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? I can imagine what can be and be unburdened by what has been. All in which you live came before you. Came before you. What came before you? What came before you? Imagine what can be unburdened by what has been. What came before you? What came before you? What came before you?
Guys, the Biden campaign has officially transferred their fundraising committees to Kamala Harris. And basically, that means they have moved under Kamala Harris's name. And basically, there is about $150 million in cash from those just got moved over to be at Harris's disposal. She is going to be possibly like in control of one of the largest campaign fundraising apparatuses and in US history. And you know what? We need to basically drop a nuclear load of cash onto this race. Like we need to win. It's do or die. And I'm here for it. Let's make it rain, folks. Let's make it rain. All right. And I believe that even in... Do we have an update on the Act Blue numbers? Do we have an update on those? Because our last update was from an hour and a half ago, and we were at $27.5 million in small dollar donations to Act Blue to Kamala Harris's campaign. We got a newer update that's up to 38 million in 6.5 hours. She's raised 38 million from small dollar donors. That's crazy, dog. We are in uncharted territory here, folks. My God. Holy shit, we can do this. I agree. Also, I believe Paladin said that if people gave $100 more collectively to Harris, that there was still some matching going on. I don't know. I don't want to speak for him. Just throwing that out there. What can be unburdened by what has been? We are currently we've been through what has been, and now we are unburdened by it. Free to imagine what can be. Wookabub hubub. Wookbub hub. Wickbub wahub. There we go. Nailed it. Alright. Is that the end of the Illegal Eagle video?
So if Biden drops out, we're all going to need a whole bunch of coffee for the next 3 months, which we can get from today's sponsor, Trade Coffee. Trade Coffee is a specialty coffee marketplace that matches customers with the best coffees from local roasters across the country.
Okay, if you want coffee, scan this now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. But I don't like coffee. You don't have to. I'm not putting a gun to your head and making you buy coffee, guys. All right, cool. Also, once again, I really appreciated this legal analysis from Legal Eagle. please go support Legal Eagle. Drop a subscribe. Drop a like on the video. Give it your all right?